My name is Alain Aina. I'm going to moderate this section. So since last year, we started inviting some special guests who are well recognized in the global technical community to address or engage on emerging issues, technologies with our community. It is an honor for me to introduce this year's special guest, one of the finance technology leaders on our time, and one well known to many of us in this community. However, for the benefit of newcomers, I will introduce him with these remarks. Dr. Vint Cerf is Vice President and Chief Internet Evangelist for Google. He contributes to the global policy development and continued spread of the internet. Widely known as one of the father of the internet, Vint is the co-designer of the TCP/IP protocol and the architecture of the internet as we use today. He has served as board members and chair at ICANN, ISOC, ARIN, etc. One of the things he has focused over the years on is bringing internet to the space and build an interplanetary internet. He is a friend of Africa and has always been there for the internet in Africa. He is a fervent believer of Africa's ability to adopt the internet and the technical institutions, AFNOG, AFRENIC, etc. Last time Vint addressed our African community was during the AFNOG inaugural meeting in Cape Town 2000. Therefore, it is a great pleasure and with full enthusiasm that we welcome him today. Please join me in welcoming Vint Cerf. Thank you, Vint, for accepting our invitations. What is your message for the African technical community today?
Well, good afternoon, Alain, and good afternoon, everyone. This is a special pleasure to renew our connection after some 20 years, and I wish it could be more face-to-face, but in the midst of the pandemic, a lot of travel has been curtailed. I'm still very much looking forward to returning to Africa, returning to Mauritius, and I must confess to you, especially to Cape Town, because I'm a great fan of South African wines, and we're starting to run a little low. So I'm looking forward to a return. All of you deserve enormous credit for your work in making the internet function in Africa. As you all know, there's still a lot of work to be done to increase the capacity of the system and also to increase the access to it, especially as you move out of the central capital areas into the more rural parts of Africa, which, by the way, is a problem elsewhere, including here in the United States. Our rural connectivity is frankly unacceptable, and there's still a lot of work to be done. And at the moment, the new administration here in the United States is planning to spend a substantial amount of money to improve rural access to the net, now that we've discovered how important it has been during the time of the pandemic. I just want to emphasize that the pandemic experience has been horrible, of course, in many parts of the world, and it continues to wreak devastation across the landscape. The thing which I believe is important is that we've seen how much the internet can be helpful, allowing some people to work at home, for example, instead of going into the office and in proximity with others. But I think everyone in this room must also recognize that the ability to work at home is limited to people whose work can be done remotely. And there's an awful lot of work that cannot, including implementing and operating parts of the internet, to say nothing of many other jobs that require close proximity. So this pandemic, in some sense, has highlighted a real inequality and inequity in terms of the impact of the pandemic and the ability of people to work. Nonetheless, it's pretty clear that access to internet is better than no access to internet for many, many reasons, including access to information and education. Even there, though, we've seen tensions where parents are trying to work from home and kids are trying to go to school from home, and they're fighting over either the equipment or the capacity of the internet. And so even there, there's been, I would say, a deficiency in the capability of the system to support all of the applications that are intended. Something else that I've noticed over the past decade or so is a significant increase in undersea cable connectivity. It's extraordinary how much cable capacity has been implemented, and more to come. Many of it will be touching on various and sundry parts of the African coastlines, and I consider that to be a very good thing. Another thing which is, I would say, increasing ease of access to the internet is an increasing amount of mobile capability, including 4G and 5G. Those things will make it almost impossible to avoid access to the internet as the time unfolds. And perhaps the most significant development in that regard is the low Earth orbit satellite systems, which are now being built, the most visible of which, literally speaking, is the SpaceX Starlink system, which has something on the order of 1,000 satellites in orbit now, and the intent is to increase that number to something on the order of 40,000 satellites. The orbits are selected in such a way as to cover literally the entire globe, including the North and South poles, which, as you know, are not reachable by geosynchronous satellite. So for many parts of the world where pulling fiber would not make any sense at all, the low Earth orbiting satellite constellations may actually make quite a big difference. There are many people here in the US that are beginning to test the Starlink system. And I don't mean to leave out the OneWeb efforts and the Cooper efforts that are also intended to be low Earth orbit satellite services. So I'm very excited about the proliferation of ways of getting access to the internet. Another thing which is important to all of you, I think, is the continued evolution of the internet's technology. Most recently, over the past decade or so, an alternative to TCP has come along called QUIC, which was initially developed here at Google. It has the property that it binds together the functionality of TCP and TLS, so that the two are treated as a single protocol. The advantage of that is that the endpoints share common crypto variables, and if you lose the connection, it's easy to reconnect, including the cryptography, as opposed to doing a TCP connection and then regenerating the cryptographic connection with the TLS protocol. So the two get combined in the QUIC protocol. It has an interesting side effect that because the shared crypto variable allows both ends to verify that the other is the same party that they were talking to before the disconnect. If one of the two parties loses its IP connection and changes its IP address, the crypto variable allows it to prove that it's the same party as before. And so you can actually handle some mobility and change of IP address, especially in a client server mode where the servers stay in the cloud somewhere with a fixed IP address, but the client is moving from one place to another, possibly getting different IP addresses after disconnect and reconnect. So technology is continuing to change. I'm sure every single one of you is also intensely aware of the fact that the security of the internet is not what it needs to be. And this is an issue in many layers in the architecture. So I'm a huge fan of pushing for two-factor authentication, for example, to avoid hijacking of people's usernames and passwords, or at least to defend against the hijack. Moreover, at Google and probably at other cloud providers, we've adopted a philosophy which we call zero trust, by which we mean that the network itself is not secure. For many years, it was thought, especially in the enterprise space, that if you could just build a perimeter defense, then the corporate network, if you were in the corporate network, plugged into it, then you were okay. It was safe to allow you to get access to anything within the corporate network. Well, we don't think that's true anymore. And the consequence of that conclusion is that, that we introduce mechanisms that require authentication above the layer of the simple hardware internet connection. So even if I'm plugged in, for example, to the Google internal networks, I'm still not allowed to get access to anything unless I use two-factor authentication and end-to-end cryptography to protect the information that's flowing in the system. Speaking of which, data flowing from one network to another is a very important property for cloud-based computing, because as some of you must know, when you have multiple data centers and you are concerned about making sure no one loses any information, one of the tactics you adopt is to copy the information from one data center to another. We do this on a regular basis at Google, and so we built a backbone network that's specifically dedicated to moving data back and forth among the data centers for preservation purposes. But we've encountered a political problem, which goes by the name data sovereignty, which is a kind of reference to the 1648 Peace of Westphalia, which some of you may remember in the European history, settled the 100 Years' War and many, many other disputes. The consequence of that Westphalian treaty is that countries have authority within their geographical boundary to do what they want. That is their autonomy, their sovereignty. Data sovereignty is sometimes interpreted to mean if you have any information about our citizens, it has to physically stay in our country. And I don't think, honestly, that that protects the data any better, because the internet is literally global in scope, and frankly, the attack vectors come from anywhere. So I'm not sure that argument holds. But the consequence of that position, of that adopting that policy, is that it makes it harder to move data back and forth across country boundaries, and that impedes the ability to replicate data in the data centers and for preservation purposes. So we're seeing some tensions that collide the national policies with the frankly desirable property of an open internet that allows for free transfer of traffic from one place to another. That same philosophy, of course, also means that when you're on the web, in theory, you should be able to get access to any information that's out there, but we all know that even that isn't true anymore. There's serious problems associated with misinformation and disinformation, and companies like mine at Google and elsewhere, Facebook and Twitter and so on, are under some pressure to try to figure out whether there's a way to filter bad information from good information. Of course, asking enterprises to do that is a very big challenge, because it's not always easy to tell whether some piece of information is incorrect or deliberately misleading. And putting an algorithm together to try to detect that is equally difficult, no matter how many times you jump up and down and say machine learning is magic. So we have technical and policy challenges, I would say, across the internet's functionality. And so all of you who are responsible for either building more or keeping what you have running are challenged, in my view, to cope with some of these policy issues, in addition to the technical ones that continue to challenge all of us. So, Ellen, I'm going to stop there. I could rattle on for a while, but it occurs to me that you might want to get into some conversation, or maybe some of the participants have questions that I might try to answer. So, however, if there aren't any questions, you know me, you can wind me up and I'll just keep going.
No. We do have questions. So, but before we allow some of the participants to ask questions, let me thank you for this speech. You really raised some of the the evolutions going on in terms of the protocol, going over the layers and trying to address some of the concern, the policy, the government and all these people may have, which show the complexity show the complexity about the internet today. And this maybe take me to ask you this question about what we call the unfinished businesses of the internet. I think you already addressed some of them, but I would like to know on this unfinished business, what shall we do differently? Because when we are addressing this unfinished business, what shall we do differently? And do you see any opportunity for late players like Africa?
Absolutely, I do. First of all, let me observe that one piece of unfinished business is getting everybody up and running on IPv6. And it's not that we have to ignore v4. It's out there and it will persist for long periods of time. But every one of us should have networks that are fully capable of running IPv6 only, so that the domain name system works and all of the other mechanisms work if you have only access to IPv6. So we have some real work to do there. But I'd strongly urge that, because the network address translation mechanisms frankly interfere with a variety of end-to-end practicalities, including safety and security. So V6 is one of my high agenda items. The second thing that is very important, I think, again, to go back to security, is to increase the ease with which our users can exercise secure practices. So that means making two-factor authentication easy. I have a number of physical devices that plug into my laptop that generate cryptographic variables. The problem is that I have hundreds of accounts, and if they all insisted that I had a separate physical device to deal with the cryptography, I would have a bag full of these things, and I'd have to carry them around and figure out which one to use to plug into my laptop. What we need is a standard, and there is a group called FIDO, F-I-D-O, that's working on a standard that would allow many crypto variables to be contained within one security device, and then automatically selected when you try to go to a website and log in. That would be a very helpful additional unfinished piece of business. You mentioned the interplanetary internet, and that too is unfinished but moving ahead in a very rapid pace now. We are at the point where we have the new protocols standardized in the IETF. They're standardized in the Consultative Committee on Space Data Systems. They're operating on the International Space Station. They are available at GitHub for free. We are planning to use those protocols in the Artemis missions, the return to the moon. And this year, the Interplanetary Network Special Interest Group of the Internet Society is hoping to release some software development kits and some applications that will run in mobiles and laptops that will allow the users of the internet to exercise the interplanetary protocols so we can test their robustness and their scalability. And so, watch ipnsig.org for further announcements along those lines. We'd love to have our African colleagues participate in the testing of the interplanetary protocols so that we can be assured that they are fully functional before we have to depend on them as we return to the moon and go on further to Mars. So those are just some of the things that are unfinished business. To say nothing of one other thing, and just generally speaking, the big problems we have with misinformation and disinformation are partly a consequence of people not distinguishing good and bad information themselves, using critical thinking up here. And so I want to encourage everyone to teach young people and themselves to think about the data that they're getting on the internet, think about where it came from, and who might have put it there and for what purpose, and is it someone deliberately trying to mislead you? We need to help people figure out where information is coming from. That's called provenance in the art business. We need to have mechanisms for identifying where information has come from. So the concept of provenance, I think, is very important and something we need to introduce into the internet so that people can be more assured of making decisions about information that they're taking or finding on the network. Again, a not purely technical problem, but also a social and political one.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Vint. There is a question in the chat, but before we take that question, so you mentioned IPv6, but the reality is that now we are still struggling to get the IPv6 in there, and NAT44 and CDN continue to develop with some V4 market. So then the question people are asking is, are we not heading to a new internet where only those who can afford IPv4 address will have some privileges internet? And in this system, how can we protect new again the new player or late player like Africa's network?
So actually, in some ways, the availability of IPv4 for purchase may drive others towards IPv6 because it will be too expensive to try to get into business using IPv4 only. So in some ways, that phenomenon may be helping increase pressure to move to IPv6, which is much more affordable and of course has substantially more address space than IPv4 does. We do need to continue to press hard. In the United States, the current administration is insisting that everyone be IPv6 capable by 2025. And I don't know if we'll make that date. We've been trying since 1996, as many of you know. But I think the pressure is on to make sure that everything will at least work if you're running only IPv6. And so we should all push very hard for that.
Okay, thank you. There is a question from Ron Da Silva. Knowing your interest in interplanetary networking and your comment on the jurisdictional tension between government and the global nature of the internet, can you share your insight into how that tension is being addressed in orbital or interplanetary jurisdiction governance?
So this is an interesting question. Let me distinguish the interplanetary internet architecture and protocols, which are not TCP/IP. They're related in the sense that they are both packet switched, but the parameters for the interplanetary internet are quite different from the parameters that are conducive to TCP/IP or for QUIC, for that matter. And here I'm speaking about the variability of delay and the size of delay in the interplanetary system, to say nothing of regular disconnections because of orbital dynamics, which is not something that we experience as much here on planet Earth. Even with the satellite-based systems that we're talking about, there are automatic handoffs that you can acquire the next satellite rather than literally experiencing a break in the signal. So I don't think, however, that the satellite systems are going to solve the political tensions. Just because you could have a ground station that could talk to one of Elon Musk's Starlink satellites doesn't necessarily mean that the government that you live under is going to permit you to do that. And there are some authoritarian regimes that would like you to not have access to the internet. Many of you have experienced internet shutdowns, for example, in an attempt to deny access to, for example, social networks or other information. So the satellite systems are not going to solve the political problems. That will have to be solved by other means, whether it's a domestic decision or international treaties. I would like to suggest, though, that we really are in need of international treaties to deal with law enforcement, because the attacks against people through the internet can come from anywhere. And so in order to deal with someone who is exhibiting harmful behavior, you may need to have some kind of cooperative agreement between the country in which the victim lives and the country in which the perpetrator lives in order to allow both countries' law enforcement systems to collaborate. So I'm anticipating that we will see some treaty agreements along those lines. And I'm also, frankly, seeing a call for government and private sector cooperation, again, to deal with some of the hazards of being online, because a substantial part of the internet, as you all know, is owned and operated by the private sector. But the policies for the use of the internet are generally set by governments. And so there really needs to be some cooperation there in order to protect citizens from harm.
Okay, thank you. Maybe another question before. I've seen no one in the queue or in the Q&A. So, Vint, and I know you are very aware that there are tensions going on designing the internet of the future, and many people think like the current TCP/IP we are using, which seem to be designed for machines, not for devices, not for the needs for the new internet, and people are calling for a totally different and new protocol. Then there are many proposals on the table. I will not mention them because I know you know what I'm talking about. So the thing is, what do you see in terms of the future of the architecture of the new internet? Do you think the TCP/IP as we know today, or what are the expected changes you see for using again the TCP/IP for the internet of the future?
Well, we've already seen that the protocol that the quick protocol that I mentioned, QUIC, is an alternative to TCP over TLS, and that might very well become the more popular protocol and for support of the HTTP World Wide Web. There have been some calls under different rubrics. One of them was called New IP, coming from Chinese internet researchers and developers. I didn't find the argument very persuasive, however, because some of the applications that were suggested, like holographic communication and the like, requires bandwidths and data rates that we can't achieve right now. There's also arguments that somehow we need to fine-tune the round-trip time delays and the response times and the like by slicing the capacity into different pieces. This is a 5G phenomenon, for example, with what's called the MEC interface. And I frankly don't buy that argument, because we've been able to do real-time communication with 20 millisecond round-trip times for example, game playing at Google with the existing TCP/IP protocols or protocols over UDP, real-time protocols running over UDP. And so I'm not persuaded right now that we need a new protocol called the new IP protocol. What I do think is we need IPv6, and I absolutely accept the idea that we need things that are other than TCP running on top of UDP, and we're seeing that happen. The last point I want to make on this is that the interplanetary protocols are not TCP/IP. It's called the bundle protocol and the Licklider transmission protocol, because they had to deal with a parametric space that's much worse than the one we deal with on terrestrially. We have noticed, however, that when you have low latency in the system and good connectivity, we can run all of the interactive and streaming video and audio on the new interplanetary protocols, but we don't always have real-time capability. We sometimes have really serious round-trip time delays in the order of minutes to hours, in which case interaction is just not possible. So we had to develop a protocol space that spanned the entire parametric range, which is much broader than the one we experienced terrestrially.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. There is a question from Loganaden. With the rise of censorship and decryption's middle boss in Africa, aren't we preventing African protocol engineers from innovating in areas such as TLS extension development? Doesn't it also prevent African consumers from getting better security, such as encryption, SNE?
So it's very clear that we have technologies now that would allow a user to get end-to-end cryptographic protection going from their equipment all the way into the cloud. The question is whether we'll be allowed to exercise those protocols. And we're hearing calls for backdoors for the cryptographic protocols on the grounds of law enforcement. But I think many people would agree with me that if you put a backdoor into a security protocol, eventually the bad guys will learn what that backdoor is and take advantage of it, in which case no one will be safe. So I don't think that's a good solution to the problem.
Thank you very much. We have 40 seconds to close. So just to thank you very much, Vint, for accepting our invitation, even though it is in the early morning for you. We really appreciate, and we hope we will, anytime we request or we ask you to join us, you will be available. Thank you, Ben. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you again, and congratulations for yet another wonderful NANOG meeting, in Africa. And I'm glad that you invited me, because it got me up this morning and I'm dressed and ready to go for the rest of the day. So thank you for that. Good luck to all of you. Stay healthy. I hope that everybody gets adequately vaccinated, and we go back to normal times. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you, Alain, Aina. Thank you to our speaker, Mr. Vint Cerf, for his presentation. It was an honor and a pleasure to have you here with us. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Neil Narku-Kenor avec Mr. Alain Aina to continue our panel discussion.
Yeah, I think I'm on. Well, thank you very much. What a wonderful program we've had. It was also intergenerational. And I'd like to thank Vint coming to us again and reassuring us that the internet will continue to grow. And also Machuo San for raising some of the trust-related issues. In any case, for us, what we want is one internet. One internet. We are barely catching up with this internet. So let's dig deep and go maybe better off. Now, I heard some interesting phrases: zero trust, don't trust, verify, trustless trust. I think with those, we seem to be on our way to a more trustworthy internet, and I'm quite happy about that.